It's Jane Austen's world. Everything happens in one little town or on one estate. And within that, she's so meticulous. I often think of her stories as like little snow globes. It's tiny, but it's also perfect. And I think that helps us as readers to see our own lives represented in the sort of decisions the characters are facing.
The Living Church, serving the Episcopal Church and the Anglican Communion since 1878. Welcome to the Living Church podcast.
Welcome back, podcast listeners, and welcome to one of my favorite episodes of the podcast every year, our annual Cozy Christmas Chat. 2 days ago, and you might have known this yourself, many literature nerds, Anglophiles, book lovers, scholars around the world commemorated the 250th birthday of Jane Austen. On December 16th, 1775, an Anglican clergy family were blessed with their youngest daughter, an infant who would grow to become one of the world's greatest novelists. And as we'll discuss today, also a profound Christian person. A loving and lively friend, sister and aunt, a scholar of human nature, and an expert on how the virtues and the vices that make or break us reveal themselves in the everyday. And she was also great for a good laugh. My guests and I today had a fantastic conversation, worthy of a cozy Christmas chat by the fire. I even had a cold, how thematic. All we lacked was eggnog. I'm sure you can make up the deficit on the eggnog side, maybe even while you're listening today. My guests are Haley Stewart and the Reverend Dr. David Goodhew. Haley is a Catholic author and the editor of Word on Fire Votive. She was co-host of the popular Fountains of Carrots podcast and is the author of Jane Austen's Genius Guide to Life, The Grace of Enough, and the Sister Seraphina Mysteries. By the way, the Sister Seraphina Mysteries are a series I highly recommend reading during Christmas. It is about a convent of mice who solve mysteries. I ask you, what could be more cozy? David is vicar of St. Barnabas Church, Middlesbrough, England, and visiting fellow of St. John's College, Durham University. He is widely published with 5 volumes on modern Christianity and church growth, but he's also given the Living Church several excellent and entertaining essays on Jane Austen's life and faith that you can read at livingchurch.org/covenant, or just click the link in the show notes. Today, we encounter Jane via Dante's Inferno. We learn from her on the virtues. We unpack the popularity of Bridgerton. Why not? We critique Jane Austen adaptations and learn about the personal practices of prayer and devotion that rooted Jane's genius. And from Mr. Darcy, who can't bear to be laughed at, to Emma with little to trouble or vex her, we talk about how humor, used with compassion, can be an expression of revelation and love. Apropos to this season of incarnation, Jane Austen brings the greatest spiritual dramas and the dramas of being human into the smallness, the limits of the drawing room. And she helps us to understand them better, to love them more, and we love her for it. Jane, the Living Church raises a glass. May light perpetual shine upon you. And we hope, dear listener, that you enjoy, as much as we did, this cozy Christmas conversation. Haley, David, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Amber.
Pleasure.
So I want to invite the both of you to start off into a nerd moment and to share a favorite factoid. We're all nerds here. It's a safe space. We love factoids. What's a favorite factoid about Jane Austen that most people might not know?
Well, one of my favorite anecdotes about her is we think of her as always being single, but she did accept a marriage proposal at one point, but then recanted the next morning. So I think that's a great story because you just wonder, what was it? Did she initially think it's worth it for financial security, and then changed her mind. I just love wondering about that whole situation and what that evening was like.
Well, it's kind of related, I think. I mean, one of the things I love about Jane Austen is that the story about how she made up some fictitious marriages in the wedding registers of her father's parish church.
What?
They found these in these wedding registers, and she is the bride, and she's married variously to Henry Frederick Howard Fitzwilliam of London and also Edmund Arthur William Mortimer of Liverpool. They think this was that these registers would have been lying around in her father's rectory, and clearly as a kid she just kind of doodled away. We know George Austen was quite an indulgent father, and clearly I just love that.
I cannot get through this conversation without asking you your favorite book by Jane Austen.
It's such a cruel question to ask us, Amber.
I know.
What our
we're going there, but we're going there.
Novel is. I usually just say Northanger Abbey would be my not favorite, but the other 5 are really neck and neck. But I think I could narrow it down to Emma and Persuasion.
Well chosen. That's fine. I'll forgive you about the Northanger Abbey thing. We can duke it out later. But Persuasion or Emma were one of those the books where you had whatever moment it was where you realized, okay, there's something Christianly deeply significant about her writing. You know, it's like not just a wonderful novel, but something else is going on here as well.
I kind of delved into her work more deeply in college. So I had read most of the novels before that. And I grew up in kind of the golden age of those film adaptations, the 1995 Pride and Prejudice, Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility, and then started reading the novels. And then in college, I got to take a class with just 4 other students. And we read all of the novels with a philosophy professor and kind of talked about Jane Austen's moral philosophical framework. I think it really helped me understand virtue, just the concept of virtue, what that looks like, what the virtues are, and the way that Jane Austen explores that in these tiny little environments and these decisions that don't seem very high stake, but are actually the decisions that are going to affect the entire community's happiness. That's when I started to see her as a Christian novelist, because the idea of virtue in the Christian tradition was something that I comprehended really for the first time within her novels. I think I was encountering her. So I grew up Protestant, and I think I was encountering her kind of at the same time I was encountering Dante and some of these medieval and the Christian tradition of the virtues, especially in the medieval era. And so then seeing her present these same ideas, but in a very day-to-day, like kind of mundane, everyone's life scenarios. I think really Jane Austen probably taught me more about the virtues than Dante, even though he's wonderful, because her plots are so relatable.
Yeah. It's really interesting and exciting to read about people being boiled in oil and all this, but it's not relatable for most people, I think. David, how about you? I'm going to put you, speaking of being boiled in oil, I'm going to put you in the hot seat, and now you have to confess your favorite novel.
I'm going to be greedy like Haley and say Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. I think in some ways Persuasion is just incredibly deep,
Yeah.
but Pride and Prejudice makes me laugh, glorious, but also deep as well as very funny. And then the point when I think I realized that there was such a spiritual depth to Austen was when actually not reading her books, but reading Claire Tomalin's biography of Jane Austen, which is a fine biography in many ways, but almost totally airbrushed out Jane Austen's faith, a bit like somebody writing a biography of Lenin and forgetting to mention his Marxism. And that made me begin to dig back both into the books themselves and then reading her letters and reading other studies of her and realizing just how profound her faith was, and how it's there the whole time. Once you start looking, you see it continuously.
Yeah. David, what you just said brings up for me what I've started calling the Bridgerton effect. In Bridgerton, we have the carriages, we have the ball gowns, we have some of the manners, but we don't have any of the morals. It's almost like our contemporary desire to separate the morals or the religious beliefs of a previous time from all the trappings that we otherwise enjoy. I wonder where that instinct comes from to airbrush that or to make ourselves more comfortable with the people from the past that we like. But what do you think is under that? What happens when we get the clothes and the carriages and the games of whist without the substance of the life?
Well, I think that there's an attraction to a story that takes place in a world different from our own. So even something like The Bear, the TV show about a Chicago restaurant, you're in this world of the restaurant business, what it's like in a kitchen, the way people interact, how it works. And it's fascinating because most of us don't live in that world. That's exciting to our imagination. I think that the trappings are so fun for us, but of course, it's missing the depth of both character and this exploration of virtue. And so I don't think you see anything like that depth in Bridgerton, but I think we're attracted to a kind of society in which everyone knows what they're supposed to do, even though they're not actually doing it a lot of the time. I think there's something that's attractive about that because I think often we feel so disoriented. And so having some sort of script is really interesting to us.
And this might be a little negative, but I wonder if there's a kind of consumerism about how we approach the past. So, or indeed a kind of tourism where you want to enjoy the sights, but you don't actually want to engage with what's in front of you. I wonder if there's something of that going on. So we're drawn to, dare I say, the kind of the glorious Georgian facade, but we don't actually go in through the door. I think our own age is prone to condescension towards the past. The past is full of people who really ought to know better and should think just like us. Again, I think one of the real bracing things about engaging with Jane Austen is she speaks with such a powerful voice. I think you have to engage with her. And actually that, if you read rightly, she really is firing torpedoes at modernity. That's a bracing challenge. And that would include the spirituality of Austen, which is there. She didn't think life was complete without prayer. I mean, one is the fact that Jane Austen wrote prayers. It's possible to pray and not be serious about faith. I don't think it's possible to write a prayer and not be serious about faith. Looking at the modern the movies of Austen and looking for what's left out, as a rule, certainly faith is always left out, pretty much. But you read the books and you realise that Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet and, of course, Edward Bertram and Fanny are profoundly devout characters, whereas Wickham and Willoughby and Henry Crawford are either not devout or decidedly flippant. The torpedoes are firing away there. It's just we've sort of managed to screen them out.
Yeah. And actually, Haley, you have included in your book one of Jane Austen's prayers. And I just want to read it here. It's a brief one. She says, "Teach us to understand the sinfulness of our own hearts and bring to our knowledge every fault of temper and evil habit which we have indulged in to the discomfort of our fellow creatures and the danger of our own souls." And so that linking between causing the discomfort of our fellow creatures and the danger of our own souls, I think of, the danger of our souls, Dante Inferno, it's real, but also the discomfort of our fellow creatures. What did you say to, Mrs. So-and-so when she walked into the drawing room? That matters. Those small gestures matter. So yeah, you're spot on, David.
I think Austen is very good at showing us how there's no such thing as a personal sin that only affects us. She's very interested in how our seemingly minor flaws sometimes actually have a great impact on the people that live with us, the people that we're close to, and virtue and vice both ripple out in the community. And I think she's so good at highlighting that. And sometimes she points out little things that as modern readers we would kind of think are, ho hum, like Mr. Elliot sometimes travels on Sundays, if you can
Uh-huh.
imagine.
Uh-huh.
But to Anne, that's a red flag, and she's right. And we would think that's a little bit silly, but we would be wrong because actually that's a little clue to his character. And I think you see some similar things with Mary Crawford in Mansfield Park. Edmund is given so many red flags about her, and you just see him ignore them all. What David said really resonated with me about what the film adaptations leave out, because I think that that's why there's been no good Mansfield Parks. The plot just doesn't make sense if the themes aren't taken seriously, and so if we don't understand why it might be a problem for this group of young people to be putting on this inappropriate play, then the plot doesn't make sense anymore. Fanny just seems ridiculous, but she's actually really insightful.
It's harder for creatives to make goodness appealing and interesting than it is to make it's easy to make evil interesting, appealing, attractive. They get all the great costumes, they get a lot of the great lines, the great special effects. It's a lot harder to make, especially quiet goodness, appealing and interesting rather than
Mhm.
sort of fuddy-duddy and boring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think at Mansfield Park, that the heart of the novel is that there's a scene where in the chapel of a stately home, and there's effectively a debate between the two key characters about the value of prayer or otherwise. Be so good if a film director could somehow get that onto celluloid, because there's a real profundity there. But I accept it's hard to do visually.
David, is that the scene where they have a chapel in their home in this estate and it's not used and Fanny notices that it's just
Yeah.
rarely used? Okay, that's right. And then they have this debate and Mary's sort of like, oh, who cares?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Fanny is
And
deeply disturbed by the fact that no one actually prays in this beautiful, expensive chapel that's in their home.
yeah, the Mary Crawford character says, "Oh well, it doesn't matter. People should do what they feel is right for them, basically." And you think, goodness, there's the 21st century zeitgeist just zinging through this Regency novel, and it's beautiful. And the moral consequences that come out of that.
Some of the consequences are pretty shocking. I think that Austen is portrayed as this kind of maiden aunt and nothing, just people visiting each other's houses. That's all that happens. But there's some pretty shocking plot points. There's the adultery in Mansfield Park. There's in Sense and Sensibility, the grooming of a teenage girl who gets pregnant. Like, there's pretty significant and shocking results of decisions and choices that are made by the characters.
Yeah. And Austen doesn't shy away from that. She also is not prurient, so she's not there to give like in the Gothic novels that she names that the teenage girls are reading in Northanger Abbey. She's not going to get into the prurient details of what's going on. But she's going to tell you enough so that you get a sense of the devastation that sin causes in lives and in communities. And she takes that so seriously. Austen lived her life within many restraints, social, familial, self-imposed restraints and disciplines. Her books show a lot of the different restraints and sometimes disciplines of the societies and people that she describes. And she even likens her own books to miniature paintings. I love you included this quote in your book, Haley. She calls her books the little bit 2 inches wide of ivory on which I work with so fine a brush. So I'm curious, as you guys have read her books, what are some of the most significant limits or restraints, you think, in her work that make it work?
Well, she's so observant of human behavior. And she's also very humble in sticking to what she knows very well. And so the world building is just perfect because it's Jane Austen's world. And I think the limits on the number of characters, everything happens in one little town or on one estate, or, it's just very limited. And within that, she's so meticulous. So I often think of her stories as like little snow globes where she's like created this whole little world and it's tiny, but it's also perfect. And I think that helps us as readers to see our own lives represented in the sort of decisions the characters are facing. Like Amber, you mentioned, what am I going to say when Mrs. So and so comes into the drawing room? Or, when Emma insults Miss Bates.
Yeah.
Like that's such an important moment because I read that and I think, oh, there's been times where I've behaved that way.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not insignificant. And so by taking the drama out of, the battlefield or the palace allows us to really explore the characters' choices and reconsider our own choices.
Her novels are an intimate environment, really intimate environment. Whereas if I'm reading Anna Karenina, there are intimate moments in Anna Karenina, but it's operatic, more expansive. And so it's a wonderful novel, but it's a lot less easy for me to really identify with Anna Karenina. That's not the purpose of Anna Karenina. And so this just confirms for me, there's so much evidence that she is writing good novels and wants to write a good story, but also that she is writing to be instructive, that this is part of her intent. It's hard for me to think that it wouldn't have been.
Yeah. What you've just said there, both of you, is great. Well, I think all I'd add is that thing about she famously spoke about liking to work with 3 or 4 families in a small location. By going narrow, she goes deep.
Mm-hmm.
And it allows her with that very small cast to explore both what they're doing outwardly and what's going on inwardly. And I think that partly is why she can splice the comedy and the seriousness, which are in there, and beautifully, in particularly in Emma, I think, which is simultaneously both a very exceedingly funny and heartrending book all at the same time. It's only fair to add that there are severe limitations, and Austen would have understood this entirely. I mean, it's striking that you have battalions of servants who made the homes that she depicts run.
Yeah.
And they're almost entirely ignored in the books. And then there's one's aware of the Napoleonic Wars, but one's not aware of the Industrial Revolution, which is also happening at the same time, and which is making possible much of the world she inhabits. But equally, I think, no author can do it all. Why should we? She was very aware of what she was doing. She could do a small thing and do it really well.
What is it that should go to everyone on your Christmas list this year? Besides a cat a day calendar, I highly recommend one of those. But may I also suggest a few items from the Living Church?
For anyone interested in the Anglican family, a Living Church magazine subscription is a great idea. We are the only independent news voice covering the Episcopal Church, Anglican Communion, and beyond, and each issue is packed with unique stories that only we write. Features book art and film reviews, thoughtful opinion pieces, wise scriptural reflections, and more. And for the clergy in your life, may I recommend our new edition of Pastoral Ministrations of the Priest, a comprehensive collection of liturgical prayers for pastoral situations based on the Book of Common Prayer and a host of traditional sources. Leather-bound, gilt-edged, red-ribboned, great price. Or if your Christmas shopping is done, would you consider a gift to the Living Church? We are a nonprofit ministry. We are in this with you. This podcast, our reporting, our events, books, if we've served you this year in one of these ways, please let us know by leaving us a gift. You can find all these gift options at livingchurch.org under Resources, Subscribe, or Donate. Also, you can check the links in the show notes. Most often, sometimes we're in a shop or we're walking along the street, but most often we're in a house somewhere. We're in the domestic sphere. David, you said there's a lot of seriousness, but there's also so much laughter there. This is comical as well. And when I think of my life with my family, the home is where the most profound things happen, but it's also where some of the funniest, kookiest things happen, where the darkest things come out, and also the just funniest, weirdest things come out. I don't think, honestly, that I've ever become truly close to anyone unless I've lived with them. So former roommates are currently my best friends because you don't just plan to have a coffee. You trip over someone's dirty underwear they've left lying on the floor, and it's sort of like, you know what? I'll never let you live that down now. And we don't have anyone literally tripping over dirty underwear, but I think we have people metaphorically tripping over other people's dirty underwear all over Jane Austen's books.
Oh, totally. I also think one of her great gifts is that she, particularly to Christians, is a reminder of how humor is good. It's good to laugh. And I think there's a real joy in her comedy, and it's mostly, I think it's by and large, it's a gentle comedy. The pinnacle is, for me, Mr. Collins, the fantastically inept marriage proposal. Personally, I reread it regularly, and it always, I'm choked with laughter. It's when he comes for his third attempt. So this woman who patently detests the idea, but he has to go in 3 times. Just glorious, and I think she wants us to enjoy the laughter. I mean, I think it's said that she would have read drafts of this to her family, and you think, oh, what it would have been to have been in the room when that was first aired. And I'm sure they were just rolling on the floor by the end of that one. But also there's such a depth in it, with Collins, who is a fool, but he has this darker side when he urges Elizabeth Bennet to abandon her sister Lydia, and urges the Bennet family to abandon Lydia. And interestingly, Mr. Bennet describes him as unchristian at that point. And I think the really striking thing in Pride and Prejudice is the way it's the lay people, Darcy and Elizabeth, who modelled Christian forgiveness to Lydia. And the lay people are showing the cleric what Christian faith looks like, having loads of relatives who were clergy would have known exactly what she was doing at that moment.
I was going to say, David, it's funny because you yourself, being an Anglican cleric, you seem to have no problem with a few laughs at the expense of people in your profession.
Oh, indeed. Jane Austen keeps us humble, and my goodness, we need that. I mean, again, she had, 2 brothers who were clerics, a beloved father who was a parish priest for 30 years, all the time she was growing up. There's no question of her love for the faith and the mechanics of the faith. But again, it's a gift to say, you can have that and not take yourself too seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And, approaching
Christmas as well, a season of joy, and to revel in the joy of what God gives, what God reveals, the joy of even being human. Haley, how have you found laughter and spiritual clarity related in Austen's work?
So I think that one of the things Austen is so good at is delighting in the absurdity of human beings and just their quirks. And instead of looking at them contemptuously, actually enjoying those little quirks and funny things that make community with other human beings, challenging or frustrating, but also hilarious. It seems so not mean-spirited, although she often is hard on her characters. And I think that what you were saying, David, about the clergy, sometimes she's hard on her characters who are clergymen, I think because she takes it very seriously. She takes her faith very seriously. So for a clergyman to be exhibiting these vices or very unchristian ways of behaving is particularly offensive to her. So she's going to be a little bit more ruthless with them. I think she's really good at that and saying, I'm going to laugh at this and just enjoy how ridiculous this behavior is because all of us behave ridiculously sometimes, and wouldn't it be better if we're laughed at instead of treated with contempt?
Yeah. That's a good word too, because I'm so grateful that we live in a time where therapy and psychology have developed as much as they have, and our understanding of the mind and human behavior. I mean, Mr. Collins was not going to therapy. If Mr. Collins had gone to therapy, and by the way, someone needs to write that short story, maybe me, stay tuned. If Mr. Collins went to therapy, would we all like to see a more healed and enlightened Mr. Collins? Absolutely. Would we ever want to see a Mr. Collins or any of these characters bereft of all of their quirks and eccentricities? No. So, you know, to be someone who is practicing virtue is to be someone who also is able to appreciate that everyone has a long way to go to the beatific vision of being fully sin-free and also fully yourself. I mean, that's a long way to go. And just having patience with the things, the big question marks in other people that don't make sense, but certainly to keep an eye on yourself most and be correcting yourself. And David, I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to some of the personal disciplines, and you too, Haley, that you guys might know about Jane Austen's own spiritual life. Like, what are some of the things that she was practicing to become a person who could sort of bear her own quirky world in a way that was very grace infused, but also hold it up to the light of truth in a humble way? What were the things in her life that she pursued to become the kind of person who could write that way?
Goodness, that's a big question. But I think that one could come in simply on the rhythm of prayer by which she lived. As far as we know, she would have had a pretty metronome-like practice of Sunday church going, and along with a practice of family prayers happening most likely daily in the home. And it's very interesting, those prayers we have of her, which are strikingly concerned about developing into a better human being. I think they can read slightly severe in a sense, particularly given the novels, but you read the prayers, which are full on about saying, you've received forgiveness in Christ. Now you need to start looking a bit more Christ-like as you deal with others. And that jumps me on to looking at, say, a novel like Emma, which I think is really more or less a story of the operation of grace. Haley, I think you alluded to it, that point where she realizes how she's really been cruel to this vulnerable old lady, Miss Bates. And that's the kind of turning point of the novel where there's repentance and grace starting to move. And then I think the rhythm of her relationships, I mean, she had a very rich relational life, within a relatively confined space, but she knew dozens and dozens of people, and clearly that had found various of them hard work, as well as experiencing great tragedy, both in terms of sickness and bereavement to those around her, and ultimately in her own life. Because of the beautiful architecture of the novels, we mistake her life. It wasn't easy. She had plenty to work on day by day, difficult and unpleasant circumstance or indeed individuals.
Yeah.
And I just want to jump off what David was saying about her community, because I think that's one of the things that attracts us to her stories is, within those limits, these characters know each other so well. And Amber, you were talking about your roommates. I think we're so isolated in modern culture that most of us don't have these friends and neighbors that we're running into every day and we're seeing at church every Sunday. And, you know, we don't have a Mr. Knightley who lives right across the way and is just stopping in to sit with our father in the evening. We just don't have that, and that's very attractive, I think, because we're really hungry for that kind of community. But in addition to all the perks of that community is those are other human beings with their own flaws, and they point out our flaws, and that's the struggle. But one thing that really stands out to me about Austen's stories is how she shows us that oftentimes God uses other people to bring his grace to our awareness of our own sin and helping guide us towards virtue. And so just thinking about that scene with Emma, she had an uneasy sense that she had done wrong, but it really took Mr. Knightley, who had such a close relationship with her because of their years and years of friendship. There was this wonderful base of affection, of respect. And so when he really lets her have it over how she's treated Miss Bates, she actually receives it very humbly. She sees that he's right. And so there's often, and you were also noting Jane Austen's focus in her prayers on having this self-awareness and honesty about our own failures and sins, that I think she's really interested in seeing how we get to that moment of awareness. And we see that again and again. Elizabeth Bennet, when she's reading Mr. Darcy's letter, and she goes, "Oh no, I really misperceived so many things. My judgment was so poor." Or Emma, when Mr. Knightley confronts her, or, there's moments where Marianne Dashwood is finally wakes up to the reality of the situation and her own bad behavior, so wrapped up in the purpose of friendship in our lives is often to help us become holy. And it's a painful process. And I think she's really honest about how uncomfortable it is. And yet that's the way grace works on our souls.
Yeah. One of the things you pointed out, David, and one thing that you talk about in your book, Haley, is patient endurance. And you use in your book, Haley, the figure of the Virgin Mary pregnant with Christ as a vision of patient endurance and the way that endurance of circumstances, of other people, patiently with charity, that this develops us in crucial ways. And when we don't have or we avoid circumstances that would allow us to go through something like that we're really missing out on a depth of development as human beings and on a depth of love, experiencing a certain depth of love that God has for us. You both mentioned Persuasion as a favorite novel of yours. And I am struck by this line in Persuasion that says about the character Anne Elliot, who is a 27-year-old. So obviously she's an old maid. She's past her bloom of youth and she has lost her first love, or she thinks she's lost her first love, but they're still longing for each other from a distance. There's some unforgiveness in their relationship, deep unforgiveness. But she like Jane is in a family, is a kind of de facto caretaker. She's trusted, she's vital, maybe a bit taken for granted. And there's this line that says, she was only Anne. And so it made me wonder, for Jane, that line must have come in some way out of her own soul. I wonder how many times she felt, I'm only Jane. If I'm only ever remembered as a good Christian or a good aunt, as she's remembered on her epitaph in Winchester Cathedral, that's exactly how she's remembered, as a good Christian, a good aunt, and then secondarily as someone with a brilliant mind. I don't have necessarily a question attached to that, but just that line moves me deeply and just makes me think how Jane must have felt as someone who's in restricted circumstances, as a single woman, unmarried, in a family, can't travel on her own, et cetera, but yet so fruitful in not only literary gifts, but also kindness, virtue, patience, long-suffering, profound relationships, loving relationships. I find that line, she was only Anne, very, very moving.
It's very moving. And I think all of us have felt like that at one moment in our lives, just kind of not being noticed, feeling neglected or feeling taken advantage of. But what makes Anne so remarkable, and I wonder if Austen is either relating to her or aspires to be like Anne, is that she isn't bitter. So she has every reason to be, but she seems to have these inner resources that allow her to accept the limits of her life and live it well, rather than getting so hung up on the way she wishes things are. And I find that really admirable and really difficult for us as modern readers to understand, because we're very interested in people standing up for themselves and really, speaking out when they're treated unjustly. And of course, there is something virtuous about that, in moderation.
I think of Elizabeth Bennet standing up to Lady Catherine de Bourgh, for example.
It's a perfect example. Or there's a moment when Anne stands up to her father.
Absolutely.
And says, I'm not going out to dinner with the nobility of England and Ireland. I'm going to go visit my poor friend, Mrs. Smith. She does stand up for herself when she needs to, but she seems to be comfortable with not having to control everything in her life, and to accept there's things outside of her control, and what she can control is living well, to loving the people around her, even when they're frustrating, being helpful, enjoying good, true friendships she has with other people. And I just find her so aspirational.
I think the great power of persuasion, the sort of great last novel, is that Anne Elliot is the heroine, and she's the heroine before, as it were, it comes good at the end. I mean, and it's very deeply moving, the end, but because she is the single figure who has integrity through the whole business. I mean, this is a slight tangent, but I do want to slightly push back, Amber, on what you said, in the sense of, I mean, on one level, absolutely, that there's a clear and profound pain that Jane Austen carries in her situation, and the spinster figure. But I'm also struck how she also had a profoundly rich relational life, particularly when one reads her letters. They show how much she received from her family, as well as what she gives enormous amounts, but and there's this profound bond between her and her siblings, and then with her many nieces and nephews. I can't help thinking, in our age where we instinctively deify romantic love, what's struck is how emotionally rich Jane Austen was through her familial relationships. Going back to the famous tombstone in Winchester Cathedral, which people are apt to sort of throw metaphorical rocks at because it doesn't say too much about her writing. It does mention it. And what it focuses on is her faith and her family relationships. And I kind of think Jane Austen would have been happier with that.
So let me just, for the listeners, I'm just going to read the epitaph. It's brief. David, you're right. It's really beautiful. In memory of Jane Austen, youngest daughter of the late Reverend George Austen, she departed this life on the 18th of July, 1817, aged 41, after a long illness supported with the patience and hopes of a Christian. The benevolence of her heart, the sweetness of her temper, and the extraordinary endowments of her mind obtained the regard of all who knew her and the warmest love of her intimate connections. I'm not sure what could be much better to be remembered for than those things.
Yeah.
If I may ask both of you just a final brief question. I don't know if we're going into the future, into the eschaton, or if we're going into the past, into the 18th century, but you are sharing a fireside glass of eggnog with Jane Austen. What are you guys talking about?
Well, I'm probably hoping I'm not going to end up as one of the bad characters in her future novels. But I think something I would like to ask her about is what differentiates her characters who are able to grow in virtue and her characters who remain paralyzed in their vices. So, what makes Edmund Bertram different than Henry Crawford? Why can Wickham not get his act together when he's presented with someone who would make him very happy? I find that interesting because it's a question about human nature and what holds us back from actually becoming the people that God wants us to be. And why do some people seem to achieve that and others not? And so I think that's what I'd like to pick her brain about.
That sounds great. I think I'm a bit shallower, I'm afraid, than Haley. I'd love to ask her if she based Mr. Collins on a particular individual and what he was like. And about all the other real life Mr. Collinses that she'd run into and to hear the dirt on them. That's not quite so eggnog, but I'd be fascinated to hear.
David, you can talk about anything over eggnog. Depending on how much rum is in it, that's part of the point of eggnog, is we get juicier and juicier as the evening goes on. I've been speaking today with Haley Stewart, Catholic writer and podcaster, editor of Word on Fire Votive, and author of some very good books, including Jane Austen's Genius Guide to Life. I've also been speaking with the Reverend Dr. David Goodhew, vicar of St. Barnabas Church, Middlesbrough, England, visiting fellow of St. John's College, Durham University, and fellow Jane aficionado. You can find both their works on Jane in the show notes today. Haley, David, thank you for joining me, and Merry Christmas when it comes.
Thank you, Amber. Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas to you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Living Church podcast, a ministry of the Living Church. This episode was edited and mixed by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. Learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. In 2 weeks, we'll be off for Christmas break, but we'll be back in a month with some fresh episodes in the new year, including a conversation on preaching and politics, a performance from singer-songwriter John Guerra, and commentary on all things Anglican from the TLC News Desk. Until then, a very Merry Christmas to you when it comes, and a Happy New Year. I'm Amber Noel, your host, and it's been good to be with you. Peace.